Well, good afternoon, everyone. I'm Pete Gess, Economic Policy Director here at Arkansas Advocates for Children and Families. And I am joined by a colleague, David Radcliffe, who is the Director of State and Local Policy at the Institute on Race, Power, and Political Economy at the New School. Um,
Thank you, Pete. I really appreciate the opportunity to be here and to visit with you all. I am going to share some slides. I know Pete has already tested you with a very challenging question regarding Die Hard, so I have another question really going to put you to work today. Can anyone tell me what this is? And you can put it in the chat or say it out loud to yourself. And as you're chatting, it is indeed a baby. But this is an especially special baby. His name is Nolan. He was born a little more than 2 years ago in Connecticut, where I'm from. And what's especially special about him is that he is the first baby bond baby in America. And what that means is that because he was born and his birth was covered by Medicaid, he will be the beneficiary of what we call a baby bond. And what that means is between the ages of 18 and 30, Nolan will receive between $10 and $20,000 for activities that will lead him on a journey to wealth. So he can buy his first home in Connecticut, start or invest in a business in Connecticut, purchase hopefully debt-free post-secondary experience. So it could be college, training, trade school of some sort, or put it into retirement. So one of those four wealth building activities. Now, we don't know much about Nolan specifically, but we do know, even in Connecticut, that is one of the wealthiest states per capita in the country. One out of every two babies are born into Medicaid, which means born into poverty. So we also know that being in poor circumstances will likely mean certain things about his life. It probably will mean lower outcomes in education, in health, in workforce engagement, etc. So we are proposing baby bonds in a bunch of places around the country. And before I talk about more details of what the policy involves and how it works, I just want to zoom back a little bit to sort of paint a picture of how wealth fits in to what hopefully are lives that are independent, prosperous, and self-directed. So if you think of income as a flow of resources into your home, I think of it as a refrigerator. So income allows you to access resources on a daily basis to afford your life, just like things that come in and out of the fridge. Now, most of income might come through wages in exchange for labor, could come from child tax credit, emergency savings, Social Security, public benefits. Income is really important for us to afford our lives, help us survive at the very least. Now, in the basement, we've got your spider webs, you got your spiders. This represents debt. So the income that you bring into a household sometimes is nibbled away at by things like medical debt or credit card debt, payday lending loans, for example. So debt is sort of a break on the income that comes into a house. This other dimension is where we want to spend more of our time in this conversation is this is a pantry. So if income is a flow of resources, wealth represents a stock, a reserve. It's resources that you have access to weather an economic shock, or to have the means to put a down payment on a home, or to have the capital to bring your good idea to market in terms of a small business opportunity. For a lot of folks, wealth comes through inheritance or trust funds or investment earnings. But for a lot of Americans and a lot of Arkansans, wealth is not something easily gained, and that's where baby bonds comes into play. So what we're trying to get through here is we want folks to survive at the very, very least, but we also would like them to thrive, where they can lead these independent, self-directed, prosperous lives. Now, you know these things already, and poverty is expensive, right? So even in Connecticut, one out of every two babies born into poverty, similar numbers here in Arkansas and many places around the country. And we know, again, that later in life, these babies will have lower outcomes across the board around education, employment, health, etc. And not only is poverty very stressful and anxiety provoking for families, but it's also stressful and puts a strain on cities and towns and even on the state, which often has to pay more down the road for more costly and less effective interventions. This uneven starting point also compounds across generations. So rather than inheriting security, young people inherit insecurity. and instability and stress that is often passed on again to their children. And young people without resources, often are without hope and are on the sidelines of not only their communities, but our economy, struggling just to get by rather than get ahead. So the promise of baby bonds is this, and this is how it's rolling out in Connecticut. And other states have their own sort of design features that sort of speak to and address the local contexts and realities that families are born into. In this state, though, for every baby born in poor circumstances, and those are births covered by Medicaid, a one-time deposit of public funds, in this case $3,200, is carefully invested and managed by the state treasurer's office. And then between the ages of 18 and 30, the young adult can access the account, which is now worth between $10,000 and $20,000 due to investment earnings. That provides this critical base of assets at the start, really at the most important start of one's life, young adulthood. And again, it can be used for one of four research-based wealth building activities, as you see on the screen. So this is a very new idea, and yet in a very short time, it's gained a lot of interest and momentum around the country. In fact, there are now 20 states shaded in green here that have either introduced or seriously considering baby bond legislation at the state level. The yellow pins represent 10 baby bond pilot projects that have popped up in 9 different states, red, blue, and purple politically. There's also a federal baby bond proposal, which at the end of the day is where we want this work to lead to. So we want the local pilot projects, we want the state policy efforts, but it'll eventually be the federal government that's got the means and the wherewithal to do this at scale. I'll say a little bit more about what wealth means. Not only is wealth the number one indicator for economic security, it also is a really strong predictor of subsequent health. So you can imagine folks born in a wealthier circumstance tend to have better physical and mental health across all age groups, tend to have better maternal and infant health outcomes, also greater life expectancy. There's a report done last year to show that if we did a federal baby bond program, certain groups would live as long as 6 years longer than those in a poorer wealth position. Those in a wealthier position have lower stress and anxiety, and also importantly, greater hope for the future. And these quotes, I'll read a few of them, and you can read the others as we go through this slide. As I read them, I want you to think about who said these quotes about baby bonds. One said, "You shouldn't have to be born under a lucky star to get a fair start. Baby bonds are not handouts or ongoing payments, but government-backed seed investments set aside at birth. Baby bonds provide a financial foundation, encouraging initiative, promoting ownership, and keeping individual choice front and center. With baby bonds, residents are more likely to build careers, start families, and invest locally rather than leave in search of better opportunities. And baby bonds are about driving economic growth and keeping the American dream alive." So these quotes are from Republican elected leaders at the local, state, and federal level, in states all across the country. And one thing that's really exciting about the promise of baby bonds is that it has enjoyed bipartisan support. And a challenge is knowing this is a thing, like to think about, like we can do something about wealth. There are actually interventions and investments that can get us there. So we can talk more later about the power of the idea for different political perspectives. So, this might be for part two of a webinar, and I hope there'll be continued conversation about this in Arkansas. What we've learned in Connecticut and other places that are getting traction on this work are a few things that help to get that traction. One is having a clear idea of what problem you're trying to address. So baby bonds doesn't address all things, nor can or should it. But if it matters for the young people in your state that they have the access to startup capital so they can engage in wealth building activities, then baby bonds might be something to consider. How you talk about baby bonds matters, and it may matter from place to place or depending on the group you're engaging. But at the end of the day, it's really about supporting family, about building fairness, about freedom and opportunity. There are other framing mechanisms you can use that might be more resonant with folks that you want to engage with this. I mentioned the bipartisan appeal, emphasizes shared values around ownership, responsibility, upward mobility, and also importantly can bridge today and tomorrow solutions. I mentioned that picture earlier about surviving. And a lot of the work that we're doing, particularly in these times, is helping people just to get through their day and to afford their lives. And that's really important, but it's also true that no matter how hard we spend time in that space, no matter how hard people work, even no matter education levels, playing by the rules, savings behavior, that for most people, that will be not enough to build wealth to lead these independent, prosperous lives. So pairing opportunities like baby bonds with efforts that do help people get through the day are really important. Finding a secure, durable funding stream is really important. No easy thing, particularly in these times, but it matters. The resources that go into support something that has a long-term benefit and payoff. It's possible in some places that pilot projects might be a way to go to learn, to scale, to build awareness about the opportunity, to test the idea, and to build towards eventual state policy. We've seen this is super exciting that not only is there bipartisan support, but there are interests and engagers and champions from a cool mix of different unexpected partners. So you can imagine as you read through this list that they each have a different self-interest in seeing something like baby bonds come to pass. So faith community, labor, chambers of commerce, mayors, hospitals, healthcare, financial sector, colleges, philanthropy, and the list can continue because at the end of the day, all these folks, have a reason that young people should be in a better position than they might start off. And also, being mindful of the landscape that we're in, acknowledging the challenges and opportunities with baby bonds and this new effort that's launched recently called Trump accounts. And I'll get into that in a little bit. So, rounding third base. So, what will baby bonds accomplish? It will provide startup capital for young people to actually afford the American dream and true freedom. Again, income, savings, hard work, playing by the rules, education are not enough for most of us to achieve the American dream. We do know that young people with assets are more likely to form stable households and contribute to their communities, unleash untapped ingenuity, and drive civic engagement in ways that can promote shared prosperity. It's also powerful, not only is baby bonds an investment in the individual, but it's also an investment in place. Baby bonds can help power economic growth by driving resources to places that have been historically disinvested in. So you can imagine, because poverty tends to concentrate, that cohorts of young people receiving their baby bond distribution. And those dollars then are redeployed in community for economic activity like home ownership and small business. A study that came out last year showed that if we do a federal baby bond program, we would see reduced student debt, increased wealth, increased home equity, and more retirement savings across all groups. And importantly, and this is as I close out my presentation, that baby bonds cannot do it all on its own. That it has to be done in relationship with other family supporting policies and investments. Things like affordable care education and affordable quality health care, access to quality housing. All these things in relationship to each other are what will get folks to achieve their best selves so they can lead these lives of independence and prosperity. And last slide, look at that. There's another little baby, that little rascal. His name is Zayden, and he is part of a baby bond pilot project in the great state of New Mexico. And look, he and his mom are very happy about the life that they are about to lead. So with that, I close my presentation.
Sorry, I was muted. Thank you very much, David. Want to remind everybody to keep those questions coming in the Q&A. There's some great ones in there already, and we will get to those shortly. What I want to do now is dig a little bit into the data here in Arkansas to sort of localize it to our state and the situation in our state currently. Okay, so this probably isn't surprising to you, but most people accumulate wealth in the United States through home ownership. So when you look at the distribution of assets that people own, that green wedge there is the big amount, right? And to next second place is retirement. And then you see equity in motor vehicles, et cetera. Very little in cash and in interest earning accounts, right? And so you might imagine if you are having trouble breaking that cycle of poverty, you don't get that opportunity to build those assets, to build that equity through home ownership. Um, and you might be interested in how this pie here for Arkansas compares to other parts of the country. This total is about $150,000. Again, this is the median, so the middle amount for the middle income earners in Arkansas. In surrounding states, the average is 190,000. So we're below the average of surrounding states. And nationwide, it's almost 300,000. So Arkansas is about half of that. And in those surrounding states, only Mississippi is actually lower than Arkansas. But if you're looking at net worth, and that is these assets displayed here minus debt that people owe, Arkansas is the average net worth is $62,000, which happens to be the lowest in the United States. And you might also be wondering how that's changed over time. We don't have many, many years of data here, but one way to do this to figure out to sort of control for inflation is to think about net worth of Arkansas divided by the national net worth. And in 2018, that percentage, that ratio was 44%. So that means Arkansas net worth was 44% of the national median. Now in 2023, it's dropped to 33%. So we're actually falling behind the rest of the country. As you might expect, and you know this well, actually, that this net worth is not distributed evenly across all Arkansans. You see about 70,000 overall. This number is a little bit different because the previous slide was 2023. The intersection between race and this is hard to get more recent data, but you see the vast disparities here that happen in Arkansas. Nor is it distributed evenly geographically, right? This is by what we call public use microdata areas. It is actually not possible at this time to go down to the county level because some of our counties are population are so small that US Census data is not released at the county level, but you get the regions of the state through this, right? And there might be some surprises here, right? Probably not that there's maybe more net worth in, Northwest Arkansas or around Little Rock, but the northern stretch along the Ozarks is actually doing pretty well. But you see the Delta, eastern part of the state, not so well, right? And this is a really interesting analysis from something called the Opportunity Atlas. And what they did here is look at folks who were born in 1978 in Arkansas in 1992, and then looked how their income had changed when they got to be 27 years old. So this is comparing 27-year-olds born at two different dates, right? On the left, you have income change for those in the bottom quartile, the bottom 25% of earners. And white and yellow is negative. They're actually making less money, right? Whereas pink is more close to zero, red's doing a little better, and blue and black is doing really well, like making more income. You see on the left, there is no blue and black represented, right? And on the right, you have the top 1%, which also has a little bit of negative, right? A little negative growth in some counties, but you see a tremendous difference because there's counties that grew 37 to 50%, those black counties. And the ones that are displayed in blue also doing really well. So, this widening gap that is happening here in the state. So where are children in poverty in Arkansas? Won't surprise you that throughout the state, right? These are just total numbers of children living in poverty. And so we got to remember this is driven in a bit by population. So when you see, Northwest Arkansas or Central Arkansas being in the black, there's just more people there, right? So it's better to dig in by saying, okay, let's take a look at what's happening over time to children in poverty. I know this is a busy graph, but this is using the supplemental poverty measure, which is an important measure because it takes into consideration things like actual cost of living in a location, right? It counts things like the cost of housing, the cost of childcare, and it also includes those public assistance programs like SNAP and a child tax credit, and earned income tax credit, those kind of things that really help families in Arkansas and around the country. So right in the middle, blue, that's the United States. You see poverty is going up over this time period. And Arkansas is actually the orange. So, not the worst in surrounding states, but certainly not the best either. Why is this going up? There are lots of reasons. So we all experience the effects of inflation, cost of living, but also in the post pandemic period, the expanded child tax credit lifted hundreds of thousands of children out of poverty across the country. Those were only in place for a year, and after that time period, childhood poverty doubled. So we're seeing this unfortunate growth around the country in childhood poverty. This map shows real income growth by different households in Arkansas. So the blue is the bottom quartile again, the bottom 25%. And that growth rate in Arkansas over this time period is less than 1%, 0.8%. Meanwhile, you look at the top 5% of households, and they saw their income growth at 18%. It's even worse for the highest 1%, or I guess from their perspective, even better. Their growth rate is 26%. And this is real income growth. This is corrected for inflation. So this is showing really stagnant growth for lots of people. So you can imagine if you're having trouble making ends meet, you don't have an opportunity to invest in wealth building or equity building kind of activities. Right? This analysis I find really telling. So what this says is, let's look at the number of children who are born in poverty or born under Medicaid in Arkansas. And that's about 15,000 kids per year now in Arkansas. So where are they located? Let's say baby bonds exist. We give everybody a $4,000 initial investment. It grows over time. And if that's removed by these children as young adults between the ages of 18 and 30, on average, let's say that's $15,000. So this is the number of kids receiving the bond times the value when they take it out, divided by the total population of that county. So these numbers seem small, but you think about, okay, here we are in Phillips County, and we're infusing $130 per person in that county to show the wealth, the investment flowing into that county. And so it makes a tremendous difference, right, over a period of time, because this is the wealth gains per year. And why am I doing that per capita? Obviously, if I didn't divide by per capita, then you would see the spikes happening in Little Rock and Washington County, where their population is just large. But in these small counties, this where a lot of the wealth gains happen will make a tremendous difference for people living there. Yeah. Okay. Let me end the slideshow here. And this is the chance for us to get to some questions. So yes, David comes back. And while I look through these questions, I just want to start with help David get your help understanding something. You mentioned briefly the Trump accounts. And I know a lot of the folks who are attending here today, and they've been paying a lot of attention to HR 1, the so-called One Big Beautiful Bill. And so they probably have heard of Trump accounts. But there's also child saving accounts, right? 529 plans. So how are these things different than a baby bond?
Yeah, good question. And I'll describe briefly the Trump account program that was included as part of the HR 1 bill. Um, there are some small similarities between Trump accounts and baby bonds, but they are two very different things and address two very different challenges. Now, Trump accounts do propose seeding $1,000 for most, but not all babies. And it does allow outside contributions, which for those who have the means to do that, could be a powerful way towards increased savings. There are some other design questions, which if there are additional questions, I can follow up. But I think the short of it is, and the other vehicles that you mentioned, Pete, 529 plans, children's savings accounts. the value of those and with Trump accounts really focuses on a young person and their family's ability to save. And while, yes, we want to encourage savings behaviors, you noted if you're in a tough financial position, like just being able to afford the basics for many people is the most that they can do. So while I think everyone wants to save for themselves and for their families, the reality is it's super difficult for many to actually do that. So if you have the ability and the means, then things like Trump accounts, 529 plans, it could be a really good way for you to go. The distinction with the baby bonds, though, it focuses not on savings behavior, though, but on the actual endowment, like on the trust. It's a way to sort of create a version of an inheritance that is front-loaded early in life and does it at a more substantial scale so, to make up the difference for those who have and those without.
Great. Good, thanks. And baby bonds is a relatively new policy tool. And you show those great pictures, I think baby Noland and baby Zayden.
That's right.
And, so we're going to have to wait another 18 years to see how Nolan does. I guess it's 12, yeah, 16 years because he's two now, I think, right?
That's right.
16 years to see, or maybe longer, how Nolan invests this money and what it means for him and his family. So, is there evidence now we can point to that baby bonds are working, that they're having an impact?
That's a great question. And you're right. In some ways, this is a very new idea, at least this current iteration. It does build, though, on some work of Thomas Paine, the philosopher from back in the 1790s, who in a much more agrarian society proposed a bit of land and a cow for young people coming of age so they can leave these economic lives that are more independent. And so while that idea didn't take root then, this current version is sort of inspired by that notion. And because it is a newer idea, the returns are TBD. We do know from simulations that some researchers have done that directionally it makes sense that providing substantial seed capital to young people will make a marked difference in their economic prospects. Some other work that we're involved with, though, also is looking at beyond the economic benefits, which you can imagine, will be notable. That in the nearer term, like in the first few years of just knowing that you have a baby bond coming down the road, or not you, the baby, probably one or two you may not know, but the parent and caregiver would know that it changes for the better maternal health. It changes one's for sort of future orientation in terms of like planning and looking forward to the future. It can reduce stress and anxiety just knowing that your child might be set up in a way that maybe you weren't as a younger person. So yes, there's still work to do to see the actual return on this investment, but we're optimistic that it's going to be important not just the family but for local economies.
Great, thanks. Um, so, a great question here from my colleague Tamika. And I'm going to embellish it a little bit with my own question. And that is here in Arkansas, the governor has a stated policy goal to get us to a 0% income tax. And that's obviously similar to other states, especially some of our neighboring states. But also, as Tamika writes, one of the major factors to get legislation passed in this state is fiscal impact and sort of minimizing that impact or maybe being alarmed at really large impact, right? And so, what kind of messaging would possibly work for folks who are interested in cutting people's taxes,
Mhm.
but rather, pointing to this investment in baby bonds?
Yeah, it's a great question, and it's a thing, not just in Arkansas, but in a lot of states. And the reality is, make a couple of points. One is that you're paying for it now. And by it, I mean folks born into poor circumstances. The state is putting money out to some degree to help those families, get through and get by. And the outcomes aren't so great because the longer we wait, as a young person gets older, the more difficult it is to turn that young person's life around. The other reality is, though, that when we resource businesses, for example, through tax credits and tax cuts and so forth, that we consider that an investment, right, in those businesses and in the state. Similarly, if we zoom out and sort of reframe that, when you think of what's the most important part of the Arkansas economy, certainly business, but it's us. Like we people here, we power the economy as workers, as consumers. So if we use the same frame rather than money going towards people as a cost, why not use the same frame as resources going to business as an investment? So we can invest in businesses through tax cuts and tax credits. Shouldn't we do the same to the most important ingredient in the state's economy, investing in people? So that framing can be powerful, compelling, and additionally, this is a one-time seed investment. So baby X born in Little Rock, receives that upfront seed capital. You allow the markets to do the work to increase that seed capital to something more substantial. And the hope is that would reduce reliance on the state in those out years. Because if that baby is a better economic circumstance, they can be more independent and less in need of state resources.
Right. Good. As sort of a follow on, we're getting lots of questions about how open is the state of Arkansas to participating in this. And I'll take a stab at that. Yeah, we just don't know at this point. We're just at the beginning processes of this. Here at Arkansas Advocates for Children and Families, we're very interested in various policy tools that can help alleviate poverty, but also create these opportunities to build wealth. And so part of the job here is to build interest and see, how many um, uh, various leaders around the state would be interested in supporting. So let me throw that back to you, David, real quickly. What are some of the sort of non-traditional sectors that you've seen supporting the idea of baby bonds? Because of course we need, legislators and governors to be interested at the state level, but who are some of those other kinds of powerful interests that have supported baby bonds?
Yeah, sure. It's a great question. I'll start with the elected side that, I know Connecticut is not Arkansas, but, for Republican supporters of baby bonds, I think of this one Republican mayor in particular, Mike Frieda from the great town of North Haven, who, was such a champion for baby bonds because he recognized that the typical economic development work that took place in his community, as important as it was, didn't always benefit the folks who lived in his community. So he saw baby bonds as a great complement to sort of more traditional bulldozer and crane type economic work. I think so. That's an example of an elected who sort of reframed it and aligned it with traditional investment in place. I would say, particularly in this state, in Arkansas, when you look at the hospital and healthcare sector, not only are big, economic engines of their own in terms of employing folks, of purchasing supplies and materials, of driving, other economic activity in a place. But we've seen from healthcare folks in particular that if you are concerned about health outcomes for young people and mothers, and in this state, it's my understanding that looking at infant and maternal mortality,
Mhm.
the Arkansas unfortunately is sort of near the bottom. And why is that? Like, what does that lead to? Well, we know for moms who are born in wealthier circumstances that, they do better in terms of, mortality and well-being. Their babies have higher birth weight. There's less infant mortality. So getting at the like what is underneath sort of some of the lower health outcomes in the state, well, it goes back to wealth. And so a framing might be in a way to engage the hospital and healthcare sector, who are imagined are quite engaged at the Capitol and other issues. This is in their interest because they want to see better outcomes for people in their care, but it's also a way again to contribute to economic growth, larger scale too.
Very good. Yeah, thank you. And a second part of that question is what kind of investment are we talking about in Arkansas? Just to let folks know, if you do the simple math and you say 15,000 kids times $4,000 each is the initial investment. That's $60 million a year. That's not insignificant amount of money, but again, these are policy decisions. And as we've talked about extensively here, talking about this as an investment in the future and that return on investment is really important. The other thing I'll emphasize is um, what's great about this, what I really like about this is the initial investment, right, $4,000 each, but then successful management of that money, those investments builds the wealth over time. So it's the market that builds the wealth. So it's not the the taxpayers that are having to come up with the 20 $1,000 on or $15,000 on the back end. It's just that initial investment. And so to touch on some of the questions here, David, what kind of return have we seen so far in Connecticut, for example? And can you say a little more about how the state treasurer actually manages the money, how it's invested?
Yeah, great question. And this is a really new and unique role for state treasurers. And it's evident that there's a lot of appetite from a number of state treasurers around the country. And because, it fits within their role to sort of be the bank, the public bank, really, for the state. And, with interest and concern about, safeguarding public resources, encouraging good savings behavior. This can be a really great complement to what state treasurers do. And I think state treasurers, for the most part, are well respected and you really focus on driving good returns for the resources that are in their care. So in the Connecticut example, so there's the capital, the initial startup capital that the treasurer has put into a trust account. It's managed in ways similar to the state employee retirement account in sort of mixed asset classes. So it's not super aggressive, but also not conservative.
Mhm.
And there's an assumed rate of return of about 6.9% a year. And historically, that's what these sorts of accounts have generated for the state and through the state treasurer's office. So that's how we have a pretty good comfort and confidence that the $3,200 initial seed funding will get to that $10,000 to $20,000, depending on how old the young person is when they take it out. Yeah, so I'll leave it there.
Yeah, very good. Let's turn to some technical questions, and I'll preface this by saying, obviously states have freedom to design the baby bond programs in different sorts of ways. There can be different stipulations about what the money can be used for. There could be different definitions of who gets one. So anything we say here is probably, what is the typical experience, or what are states doing so far? But someone's asking here, are there any circumstances in which families can access it before the child becomes an adult, or is it sealed until, 18?
Yeah, great question. And yeah, Pete, I appreciate your point too, that if Arkansas pursues this, it should be um, to serve and support Arkansas families. So don't do what Connecticut did. Do something that will be designed and make the most sense for the challenge that you're trying to address here. You certainly learn and pay attention to what other places are doing. And to the question about can families or others access, so the design of Connecticut is such that the young person actually never receives the money directly. So there's not a named account for David or for Pete or Tamika and others who are on this call. But it actually is, and it's designed intentionally that way. So it goes actually directly to a third party. So I turn 18, I've completed a financial education course, which is part of the legislation. I say, hey, I want to put my baby bond towards buying a home, for example. So with verification, those dollars, my share would go towards an escrow account to help with a down payment, for example. And that's intentional for a couple of reasons. One is to ensure that the uses are for wealth building activities, because you can imagine, rightly so, young people and families having other, today needs that those dollars could be deployed towards. But this is the idea is to sort of, break free from this generational insecurity. And then also it does, we think, sort of reduce the likelihood of bad actors trying to intercept those dollars. Not just family members, but systems and structures who maybe have some history at trying to, get their hands on these sorts of resources. And the other thing it does, because it's not in a named account, it goes to a third party, so it doesn't show up in my account. So if I am eligible for other public benefits, it won't affect my ability to receive those. It doesn't get taxed. It also isn't considered an asset for financial aid purposes. So the idea is to maximize the effect that this distribution has on the young person rather than getting whittled away through bad actors or other policies.
That last point's great because Arkansas has some of the strictest asset limits on accessing public benefits. So this would not count against a baby bond program would not count against that. So that's great. Lots of questions about what happens if a baby born in Arkansas moves out of Arkansas.
Yeah, well, we hope that doesn't happen. And we also, I mean, that's another like when you think about like framing and compelling messages, um, you know, the net migration to Arkansas is positive. A lot of that's driven, as you all know, way better than I do, in northwest part of the state. Other parts of the state have seen a net loss of young people over time, and the birth rates tend to be lower as well. So, baby bonds could be a way to incentivize and resource young people to remain in community, to remain in state. So that could be, a powerful selling point when you're talking about how to advance baby bonds. And Pete, I'm sorry, I lost track of your question.
Oh, so did I. No, just when a kid leaves the
Oh, right.
state.
Yeah.
What's
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. So, we, again, this is the Connecticut model, doesn't have to be the Arkansas model. Now, we recognize, particularly where we are in the country, that there's a lot of mobility between states. So, folks might move into New York or to Massachusetts or New Jersey and come back. So, that's okay. But at the time, so you have to be born in the state and you have to be a state resident at the time you make your claim. And the money has to be deployed in the state. So, if you leave the state and don't come back, at least in the Connecticut model, you don't get your baby bond.
Gotcha. Right. Um, okay. So who can participate? Is there an income limit per household? As we mentioned before, that's loosely defined as children born in poverty, and many states have defined that as the birth is covered by Medicaid, right? Have you seen other states use other sort of markers on this, or is that pretty typical?
That tends to be typical. Some have looked at subsets just to make it sort of a smaller starting point. So, like TANF, which can be a subset of Medicaid, for example. But you get to choose. I mean, some states, like the idea would be like everyone gets something, and then those maybe who have Medicaid get more, because the idea is then for those in a lower wealth position that they have additional resources to be able to sort of get that fair start. So, but yeah, Medicaid tends to be the standard on how to determine eligibility.
Right, good. And lots of questions about the financial education
Yeah,
component, which I really appreciate. I heard you say earlier a really important point that people of means tend to have access to financial advisors and all kinds of advice. They may, get some of that education through school, but typically baby bonds programs have a financial education component. What do those look like?
it's a great question, and that was a really important selling point in Connecticut, and I think in other places as well, because you can imagine young people who maybe haven't had to manage sort of this large sum of dollars before might be a bit overwhelmed and uncertain, and maybe not have the experience or relationships to know like what choices to make, what goals to set around that. So, as you said, Pete, like yeah, folks who have means, have advisors and coaches to be able to make decisions on the best way forward. So it's TBD, like what shape that financial education support will look like in Connecticut. There's still some time to figure that out, but the dream is that it's not just like when I'm 17 or 18, like I'm getting close to the age where I might take out my baby bond. That's not just a one-time thing. That's ongoing and it starts earlier in life and potentially involves the family and caregiver just to begin to socialize, what this opportunity could mean. And because knowing I have this resource when I'm maybe 12 or 15 might cause me to make different choices about what I might want to do for school or whatever follows school, for example. So having that support, not just what to do with the money, but goal setting, we think is going to be really important. And that's some of what the work of the pilot project has been, is like to really dig deep on what kind of advising and coaching and education makes the most sense, like who delivers it at what point, around what
Mhm.
content, frequency, those sorts of things. So and I think it's a really important element, but the shape of it is to be figured out. And maybe you all will land that plane. So in Arkansas, you'll figure out the best way to do that.
One can dream, yes. Um, so obviously, 10 to 20K is not insignificant funds, right? That's it can make a huge difference. Um, but we don't know how far money will go in 18 years. I wonder if you talk a little bit about, are these adjusted for inflation? And how that financial education we just talked about can help folks sort of think about how to leverage that money to really accomplish goals.
Yeah, it's a really great question. And yeah, we know 10 to 20,000 is not nothing. And it's 10 to $20,000 more than many of the eligible families would otherwise have access to. But it probably in 18 years won't be enough to even put a down payment on a starter home, for example. It will get significantly away there. So like bundling baby bonds and leveraging other capital resources small business loans if you're doing an entrepreneurial activity or first-time home buyer programs. So it's just like being really smart and strategic about existing resources for these sorts of efforts and how to leverage the baby bond is a thing. And it's also like a role. I'm really excited that the Community Action Agency Network, for example, is represented here. They were like really key champions in Connecticut. Part of the work that those important work that folks in that space do is making sure folks are aware of and connected to the resources that they're eligible for. So similarly, you can imagine, and this is like thinking ahead, like you can imagine some of the financial coaching being a version of that. So if we're doing that when the young person is in their early years for their mom, making sure heat assistance, food support, et cetera, you can imagine sort of the bigger question about this baby bond is now part of your um, portfolio essentially, and like how to make the most of it and leverage it for maximum benefit.
Right. Very good. Um, so I want to reiterate again the four typical uses for baby bonds at withdrawal are post-secondary education, down payment on a house, starting a business, or retirement savings. Have you seen any other uses that have been stipulated in legislation or in plans?
Yeah, it's a great question. And again, Arkansas gets to decide. We
Right.
do think that the power of the idea is to focus on activities that build wealth. So it's not designed to meet the needs that folks have in the moment. So yeah, we need folks to be able to pay the light bill and put food on the table and get the car tire fixed and those sorts of things. The Bay Bonds isn't designed to do that or to address that. You could, in some states have sort of left a fifth category, like sort of TBD. Because one thing we don't know about wealth in 18 years is we don't know. So there might be other innovations that would be really good, powerful uses for baby bond that we just can't even imagine today. Like think back 18 years ago, like what might have been, um, you know, sort of top of mind or what might be priority ways to build wealth. And, that's changed, a fair bit. And so just leaving space for the unknown, might be a smart design feature.
Yeah, good. Sorry, just scrolling through the questions. Great questions are still coming in.
Love.
I think typically, like in the Connecticut case, the upper age limit is 30. Is that right? Is that pretty standard? And why a limit in the first place? Age limit?
It's a good question. Again, that's a design choice. I think some have looked at 25, for example. Some have proposed waiting until later. Like sometimes you could imagine like a younger person might just not automatically, but be more likely to put their baby bond right into education purposes, whether it's training or trade school because of the age that they are. And that's not a bad use necessarily. But if there are other, like New Mexico, for example, pays entirely for community college and state institutions. So if you wanted to do that, you wouldn't need a baby bond for that. So having the resources available for a younger age, when maybe they're through schooling at a typical age, might be a way to go. And I think there's a ceiling on the age because the idea is to concentrate and deploy these resources at really a critical moment in one's life course, which is young adulthood. The idea is to sort of front load the inheritance. So rather than waiting until, like, if you just let it ride until you're 50 or 60, then it sort of defeats the purpose of allowing these wealth building activities to have the power of time, which is where like the appreciation and so forth goes in. So I think it also allows time, like, so I don't have to take it when I'm 18. So if I don't know what I want to do, I just let it roll and I have some experiences. I do some more thinking, planning, living, and I can take it out when I'm 23 or 27. So just it doesn't put as much pressure on the young person to take it out in those early years. It lets me sort of grow into it.
Right. Very good. Our good friend Dr. Wheeler here did some math on the fly. I just said $60 million. She came up with $64 million. So I'm glad to see we're close on here. 64 million a
Yeah.
year. Where does Arkansas find that money? That's David's not from Arkansas. Hard for him to answer. But yes, this is the challenge. It's how to be creative with this. I will say, if you saw the news today, in the first quarter, we have a $60 million surplus so far on the budget so far this year. And so there are policy decisions to be made. For example, like are we headed to another round of income tax cuts, or are we going to instead use that surplus to invest in things that will make a tremendous difference long term for the state of Arkansas, like baby bonds? So that's one possibility. Another is looking for new sources of funding, dedicated sources. And, I don't know. There's also a lot of news these days about lithium mining in Arkansas and how lucrative that may be. So, is there an opportunity there? Don't quote me on any of this. This is not anything that, Arkansas Advocates is like, we're going to go out and chase this policy and this funding source. But I think anything that moves forward in Arkansas is going to have to do that really strong creative work around identifying a source. And in other states, has it been mostly general revenue, or have there been, like, I think New Mexico maybe has land grant money that they've put into it? I don't, so what's happening out there?
Yeah, but it's still very early stage. So most of these are proposals rather than actually things that have happened. But you're right. So New Mexico is looking at their gas and oil revenue, and they've accumulated, quite a pot that some of which has already been dedicated to providing universal early care and education. So that's, a commitment the state has made on that behalf. North Dakota similarly, got, pretty good land grant opportunity there. Appropriations tend to be the least attractive because of the vulnerability and because this is a long-term return that the champions for today legislatively might not be in office in 2 or 4 years. So depending on the, shocks that a place might witness or just the changes in administration, appropriations sort of least desirable. But, thinking about, and so this is easier said than done. I mean, a whole bunch of some places, for example, I've looked at unclaimed property. You ever hear of that? So I don't know who manages it here in Arkansas, but it's often is under the state treasurer office. So,
Mhm.
granddad leaves behind a savings account that nobody knew happened. Heirs are able to sort of claim that. Oftentimes, though, some of those, lost retirement accounts or savings accounts or bonds, et cetera, go forever unclaimed. And it can just sit there, accumulating interest. In some states, you repurpose, portions of that, knowing that it won't ever get claimed for activity. So in Colorado, sometimes use it for tourism promotion. Rhode Island and Vermont have considered could a portion of unclaimed property be used to seed baby bonds in those places. So there are a whole bunch of creative ideas out there, but it's still exploratory for many.
All right. And one last question for you, David, that I haven't thought about before. Has Connecticut or any other states looked specifically at incarcerated moms and baby bonds for those babies? I assume they would generally be included, but I don't know if there's any programs targeting babies of incarcerated moms.
So again, any birth, it's a birth, not the mom or family's health status or position. The birth covered by Medicaid, you're baby bond eligible automatically. So nothing that the parent, your baby has to do to be eligible. So if the mom is incarcerated, at giving birth or later on, that baby is still eligible because it's a birth event itself.
Yep, very good. Okay, I think we got to the spirit of the questions today. There's a few little technicalities that are technical questions we didn't get to that we will certainly put in the email that goes out to everyone. I do want to end on what might be the most important question, which was, what can we all do to bring baby bonds to Arkansas? Yeah, I'll say the first thing you can do is really spread the news. Say, hey, I heard about this really great idea today at this great webinar, and just talk it up with people in your networks, your friends, your neighbors. The second thing is, most of you probably are here because you already subscribe to our action alerts at Arkansas Advocates. You get our emails, that sort of thing. Continue to pay attention there. We will be releasing more information in the near future about baby bonds and sort of directing to what may happen when we head towards the 2020 legislative session. And finally, if we do get to a point where we are advocating for new policies, we'll call on a lot of you to to be spokespersons, to be advocates together with us for baby bonds. That's still off into the future. We are still working towards that point. But again, if you sort of pay attention to Arkansas Advocates and the information we put out, you'll be well informed about what's happening in baby bonds here. And I will mention there are other people in Arkansas that are also thinking about this. So we will definitely think about a collaborative approach going forward. All right, and you're always welcome to reach out to me in particular as I think through baby bonds here at Arkansas Advocates. I'm just P Gess, P-G-E-E-S-S, at arkansasadvocates.org. You can find me on our website, of course. And I want to thank all of you for attending. This was, I think, a very great, robust conversation. I want to especially thank David sharing all his wisdom and expertise and experience with baby bonds with us. And we're going to call on him again to continue to support baby bond effort in Arkansas. Thanks, everyone.